When we produce car reviews for this channel, I and the rest of the team do our darndest to remain as impartial as possible. We try to make sure that we give each car a fair whack and put aside our own personal views about our automotive preferences. And if we have any prior experience of the vehicle or happen to have owned a car from the same brand as the ones we're reviewing, we like to make sure you know about it because confirmation bias is a real thing. Which brings me to the subject of today's review, the 2020 Chevrolet Bolt EV. It's undergone a few mild cosmetic refreshes for the 2020 model year, but it's also got a new 66 kilowatt-hour LG Chem battery pack that's the next generation on from the 60 kilowatt-hour battery pack that came in the 2017 through 2019 Bolt EVs. That results in a larger EPA-approved 259 miles on a full charge compared to the 238 miles of its predecessor. There are also some tweaks to the DC quick charging curve. Something GM says means that this car will stay at a higher charge rate for longer than its predecessor, although both cars still max out at 55 kilowatts of maximum charging current. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know that I own not one but two Chevrolet Bolt EVs. So this is going to be a particularly difficult review for me without any confirmation bias. But I'm going to try. And believe me, after spending a week with this car, there are some things that I like about it that I already liked about my own Bolts. 3 years on, there are also some things that I think Chevy should have dealt with. On paper, better is better, but is it worth upgrading from the original Bolt? Let's find out. So what's different between the 2020 Bolt EV and the 2017 I've got sitting at home? On the face of it, not a lot. The car feels very much the same. The seats are maybe a little bit firmer, but that's because it's a new car. It's only got a couple of thousand miles on the clock. This being a Premier trim version has the leather seats rather than the cloth seats. And I've got to admit, I prefer the cloth seats of my LT to the Premier's trim. Always have, I don't know why, I just prefer cloth seats. Inside, everything is as it was in the original Bolt. There's no additional features really to speak of. Only real difference to the interior of the new 2020 Bolt is the fact that it's got an updated Qi charger if you go for the Premier trim option. If you go for the LT, you don't get wireless inductive charging for your phone. The Premier version has always had wireless inductive charging, but for the last couple of model years, it's been incompatible with the latest phones from Apple and quite a few Android phones. That's because previous model years of the Bolt EV didn't have the latest Qi wireless charging standard. And as a consequence, it means that if you've got a brand new phone and a couple of year old car, you couldn't get the wireless charging to work. Because there's no wireless CarPlay, you're going to plug your phone in anyway. So honestly, that's a bit of a moot point. If you were looking for that one reason to upgrade, that's not it. The other more beneficial upgrade that you're going to get if you have the Premier trim, and again this is not available on the LT, is that reversing camera and the rear view camera. It's a thing GM's been doing on all its vehicles, and if you flip this little button here, it switches between a live view using a camera and your traditional reflective surface. I've never been a fan of this technology in any car because you have to change your focal length. When you're using a mirror, your eyes are using a different focal length to when you actually have to focus on the screen. And I'm not explaining it very well, but physics. You have to refocus to use the rear view mirror if it's in the camera mode. If it's not, if it's just in reflective mode, then it just functions as a regular rear view camera would. And I really much prefer that. That camera system has been around on the high-end Bolts since its debut, but what you get for the 2020 model year are some improved controls that allow you to change the contrast or the brightness when you've got your rear view mirror in the screen mode. And that's really the only big difference that you'll see. The lack of wireless CarPlay, if you've got wireless charging, is one of the head scratchers of the Bolt EV. And the other one is the lack of adaptive cruise control, especially on the Premier version. The Premier version comes with the radar-assisted distance sensors, the pre-collision detection, emergency braking, all of that good stuff. It even has lane keep assist, but what it doesn't have is adaptive cruise control. And that just seems like a really silly thing to miss out on a car that's really not necessarily a cheap vehicle. You know, other cars in that $25,000 to $45,000 bracket, which is where the Bolt tends to sit, depending on if you get dealer credits for buying your car or you go for the low end or the high end version. Most cars today will have adaptive cruise control as a necessary feature. This car doesn't, and I don't understand why. That said, I'm not going to lie. The distance sensor system for this car is really useful, especially if you're on a freeway, as it helps you maintain that safe 2-second gap between the car in front and yourself. Interestingly, it only measures up to 2.5 seconds. Once you go beyond 2.5 seconds, it says you're beyond 2.5 seconds, and then it basically doesn't tell you how far away you are from the car in front. Generally, I'm guessing if you are 2.5 seconds or more behind the car in front, that's not going to mean you're going to hit them. You should have time to stop. The original Bolt came with something called Hilltop Reserve Mode. It allowed you to choose between charging your battery to 100% full or charging it to 90% full, and it was designed for people who lived on large hills like I do. The idea is pretty simple. If you live on a hill, you set your Hilltop Reserve Mode, and then when you leave your house in the morning, there's still a little bit of space in the battery pack that allows you to recapture some of the energy as you're going down the hill, store it in your battery for later use. Now, that system works pretty well, and I would say that using Hilltop Reserve Mode is also pretty good for your car's battery pack, because it means you're not charging to 100% all of the time. The new 2020 Bolt allows you to really be much more granular about how full your car is when you charge it. It allows you to slide your finger along and select exactly where you want your charge to be, and it will give you a range prediction based on where your finger is. It's basically the same system used by Tldr since its Model S. It's much more intuitive. It reminds me very much of Tldr's system, and it seems to work really well. If you only need 200 miles for your next trip, then that's all you charge up to. If you need more, you can increase and charge to the maximum allowable range. I'm currently driving out to Tillamook in Oregon, and the roads here are a little bit gnarly. I think there must have been an earthquake or something in the region at some point in the past, and it's made the roads very, very bumpy. It's a good chance for me to test the suspension of the 2020 Bolt EV, and I'll tell you, it's really no different to the 2017s, 2018s and 2019s. This car is a bit firm on the suspension, but if you like a firm ride, you should be quite happy. This is not a luxury car. It doesn't drive like a luxury car. It drives more like a hot hatch. In fact, I've been on the record before as saying that this car is the closest thing, I think, to an electric hot hatchback. It doesn't nanny you when it comes to the power delivery. If you want to squeal the wheels and brake traction, then you can. And it drives very much like the early hot hatches of the 80s and 90s. At least it reminds me a lot of that. A lot of people are going to ask, why get this car when you could buy a Tldr? Especially as this car in its highest end is well into Tldr money. And I should be clear, you can probably get a Bolt LT for a lot less than a Tldr, especially with all of the cash on hood deals that are happening right now. But if you go for a high-end model like this one, which is what, $45,000, then you are in Tldr price range. And I think the answer has to be whatever fits your needs. But of course, you buy a Model 3 for other reasons. You'd buy it for the autopilot, you'd buy it for the supercharger network, and you'd buy it because it's a Tldr. The Bolt is more of a tool than a status symbol. And I don't think anybody would buy this car expecting it to stand out, because frankly, it doesn't. And for some people, that's a good thing. The Bolt EV is very unassuming, and people today, especially this week with a brand new shiny car on my driveway, people still ask me, is that electric? Although GM hasn't really done a whole lot to the interior of the car, most of the tweaks here, of course, are underneath, with the battery pack getting those 6 extra kilowatt hours. I've not been able to do a full range test while I've had the car today, but I should note, when this car was launched last autumn, I and another journalist paired up and drove it on a test route that GM had prepared for its West Coast launch. We were the only pair of journalists that managed to drive the course without stopping to recharge. I think the distance was 250 miles or something, and we arrived, I think, with about 20 miles left. It was a really cold, wet, horrible day with lots of rain, lots of cold weather. We still managed to do it. So I don't feel obliged to do a range test here. But I can tell you, I've very easily done more than 200 miles on a charge without needing to get in worry, and there's still 73 miles left in the pack. Many of you will look at that and say, yes, but that's more than the EPA range estimate, and you'd be right, it is. But like most electric cars on the market today, it's pretty simple to best the EPA range estimate if you're gentle, and of course you can miss it by a country mile if you drive like a hoonigan. Today I'm driving in my normal Nikki mode, which means I'm generally pretty efficient. I should note here that the 2020 Bolt EV is actually marginally less efficient than its predecessor. I'm assuming it's something to do with the extra battery capacity, and I'm assuming it's slightly heavier. I haven't checked the specs for that, so you're just going to have to go with me here. But on paper, the 2017 through 2019 Bolt EV managed to do 100 miles with 28 kilowatt hours of electricity. For the 2020, that has increased to 29 kilowatt hours for the same 100-mile distance. GM says it's made a few tweaks to the regenerative braking system for this model year car, but honestly I can't tell any difference. It's still got the same D, L and then regen on demand that any other Bolt has. For those who don't know, D is like driving a standard automatic when you lift your foot off the accelerator. It will slow down but not hugely quickly. If you switch to L, it's like downshifting or having a low ratio gear on an automatic gearbox. And then if you add the regen on demand, it's like having really, really strong engine braking, and you've downshifted into the lowest gear possible. Your car will come to a halt pretty quickly without you needing to touch the brake pedal. One thing I didn't expect to talk about with this car, but I guess I'm going to, is how terrible the stock tyres are. I believe they're Michelin Energy Savers with some special goo inside so that they can self-seal them. They are absolutely terrible, and this car does not have great handling with them. I don't have stock tyres on my Bolt. I've upgraded them to aftermarket ones, and it grips the road far better than this thing does. So what else can I tell you about this? Well, you know, you get your extra 21 miles of range, which is a nice bonus and gives you a good buffer. But honestly, I've never really felt that the previous version of the Bolt had any issues with range. I was able to get it up, I think, 250 miles on one occasion on a long distance trip in winter, and it was just fine. I hate to say it, I think that extra capacity was really just a marketing ploy to try and encourage you to buy the latest version. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great that GM and LG Chem are working on newer battery chemistries all the time, but 21 miles? That really is an incremental tick-tock style refresh. And the 2020 Bolt EV reminds me very much of the 2016 Nissan Leaf, before they brought out the second generation. It was an increase from a 24 kilowatt hour battery pack to a 30 kilowatt hour battery pack. And, you know, some people bought that car and they were happy with it, but it was another marginal increase. In fact, it was the same increase, 6 kilowatt hours difference. Now, when you have a car with a 24 kilowatt hour battery pack and it can only do sub 100 mile range easily, adding an extra 6 kilowatt hours is a big deal. In this car, when it's 60 kilowatt hours, adding that extra 6 kilowatt hours for 66 kilowatt hours, it means that this car is not an upgrade for anybody with an existing Bolt. If it's somebody going from a Leaf, for example, or maybe not even an EV, then definitely this car is still a good contender. And unlike the Nissan Leaf, of course, which has issues with battery degradation, quite severe battery degradation, the Chevrolet Bolt doesn't seem to be suffering from that. At least the early 2017s through 2019s, we've got data on those. None of them really seem to be suffering major battery degradation. The 2020s are obviously way too new to have any degradation. Select Car Leasing recently concluded from data that they'd gathered from Geotab, which in turn has been collecting data from EV drivers around the world, that the Chevrolet Bolt EV has some of the best battery health in terms of battery degradation. There doesn't appear to be any noticeable battery degradation across a significant number of the Bolt fleet, certainly the Bolt fleet that were having their data shared through Geotab, and that is a great thing. And so it means if you are considering buying a 2020 Bolt EV and you've just got into the electric car world and you're willing to keep this car for a number of years, you shouldn't suffer any major degradation issues. Personally, I haven't seen any. Because COVID-19 is still very much rampant here in the state of Oregon when we're filming it, and our new cases per day has shot up per day in the last couple of weeks, and next week there's a new law going into effect that says if you are in a public place inside, you have to wear a face covering. For all of those reasons, I'm playing it safe, and I'm not going to stop at a DC quick charger. A lot of you wanted me to do that, and I wanted to do that, but given the risks with COVID right now, I don't feel that there's a huge merit to that, especially since I've spoken to a lot of people who have driven this car and tested this car with rapid charging sessions. And the general consensus is that this new improved charge curve for DC quick charging is noticeable, but only really if you're doing a shorter charging session. And I'll explain. How this works is the new charge curve will keep the car at a higher power level for longer into its state of charge. And that means if you're charging from, say, 10% up to 40%, your charge time will be significantly reduced compared to the 2017s, 2018s and 2019s. If you're charging all the way up to 80% though, you still may save yourself 5, maybe 10 minutes overall in optimum conditions. But let's not pretend here that DC quick charging is the same one and done in all situations. It is such a subjective experience, and it depends on a whole plethora of different things: how warm the battery pack is, what the weather conditions are outside, what the charging station is doing, because if the charging station is too hot, it may slow down. If it's too cold, it may slow down. But let's be honest, if you're road tripping in a Bolt EV on a long distance trip, 5 or 10 minutes is probably not going to make a massive difference if you compare it to the previous model year Bolts. The only time you're really significantly going to benefit is if you're doing one of those epic road trips like we did earlier this year when we drove from Portland, Oregon all the way to Austin, Texas in my 2017 Bolt. In that situation where you're charging 5, 6, 7 times in a day, knocking off 5 or 10 minutes every charging session is going to be beneficial. But I've seen plenty of data from people who've said, yeah, it's not really that noticeable. And it depends on the charging station, and it depends on whether the charging station allows you to go up to 55 kilowatts, which is what this car tops out at, or whether it's going to cap you at 40 or 45, which is what a lot of charging stations do. A lot of charging stations in the wild today are rated for 50 kilowatts, but they actually don't ever get to 50 kilowatts. And it's only really the charging stations like the ones owned and operated by Electrify America and the new ChargePoint ones that really give you that extra over the ones that are ostensibly rated for 50 kilowatts. One thing I'd hoped to see from the 2020 model year Bolt, especially with the increased capacity of the battery pack, was a better, more powerful onboard AC charger. 10 kilowatts is becoming the norm among a lot of EVs on the market today, and the Bolt EV is still stuck at 7.6 kilowatts. Because you've got those extra 6 kilowatt hours of battery capacity to fill, that increases your overall empty to full charge time to just shy of 10 hours. Obviously, if you're charging on a lower power charging system, this is going to be agony to charge at home, but then the same is true for any car with 60 plus kilowatt hours of capacity. So there you have it. It's pretty much the same as the 2017, 2018 and 2019, just with a bigger battery, a slight tweak to the regenerative braking, a few nips and tucks in terms of exterior body styling, a new Qi wireless charging system, and a far improved charger information system or charger timer system that allows you to figure out how full you want your car to be. Does this mean you should buy a 2020 Bolt EV? Well, that really depends. This is just a mild of mild refreshes before the proper mild refresh, which was due to take place this year, but then COVID came along and said, no, I don't think so, and it's now due to take place next year. I know a couple of people who have sat inside that new mild refresh Bolt. It's got a brand new interior with new seats, and I should note that these seats are the same controversial seats that have been in this car since day one. And I don't have a problem with them, but I know a lot of people who say they're really uncomfortable. I've never found them uncomfortable, and I'm pretty big, but that's just personal preference. But the car I'm really interested in is the Bolt EUV, which is due to come out next year as well. It is based on this platform, the platform I'm driving now. So it's going to have the 66 kilowatt hour battery pack, the same 150 kilowatt electric motor, but it's going to be slightly larger, which means it's going to have more space. It's going to be more of a crossover feel as opposed to the Bolt's hatchbackness. And a lot of people refer to this as a crossover. It's not, it's just a tall hatchback. The Bolt EUV is going to be much more of a crossover feel and crossover look, and it's due to hit the market next year. We've already had a bit of a sneak peek thanks to the Buick Velite 7, which launched in China this week. Being slightly larger, we can expect it to travel a little less far per charge than this car, but if you have a family and you need extra space, I think the Bolt EUV is going to be a good car. But let's not forget the elephant in the room. The Bolt EV is based on 3-4-year-old technology. It was in development a couple of years before that, and GM is coming out with its Ultium battery system. That's the battery system that's going to power the new Hummer EV. It's going to power the new Cadillac Lyriq and a slew of new electric vehicles from the GM brand. It's going to be a much more capable battery. It's going to be capable of higher current charging, up to 250 kilowatts in fact. It's going to have up to 800 volt capabilities depending on the vehicle it's in. And this modular battery pack system is designed so that if there's a problem down the line with that battery, you can swap out the individual modules that are failing for new battery technology, and it will all play nicely because it's all wireless battery management. It's essentially a brand new platform for how batteries should be. And if you buy a 2020 Bolt EV, you buy the Bolt EUV when it comes out, they're both based on the current technology in this car, so you're not going to get to benefit from the Ultium system. As an existing Bolt EV owner, this car is very familiar and not a lot has changed. What has changed for 2020 is mostly useful. I like being able to tell the car just how full I want it to be every night, and the replacement of hill departure mode with this target charge mode is fantastic. I also quite like the new subtle styling up front. It's a smart way of differentiating the car from its predecessors. But while the Bolt EV is still a strong car, there's plenty that could and should have been done for this year to make the car better. First, I have no idea why GM decided to delete these rear door unlock buttons. I've got those on my Bolt, and when I've got my hands full of shopping and a full boot, I just love being able to unlock the rear door and throw things in so easily. And I think GM has overlooked that benefit. There's also a lot of stuff that's missing from the 2020 Bolt that really should never have been missing from the original Bolt. I'm not nitpicking here, but automakers have a really bad habit of deleting key features that other cars have as standard that EVs should have too. I'm talking about convenience features like home link garage door openers, electrically operated front seats, and adaptive cruise control. Frankly, I am still confused as to how GM put forward radar on this car for emergency braking and didn't think to add adaptive cruise control. It's also a shame that GM decided to keep the original Bolt EV seats in this mild refresh. It could have upgraded the seats. Those seats are expected next year for the Bolt's delayed true mid-cycle refresh, by the way, along with a variety of improvements to the interior. GM could have improved the power levels of the onboard charger for this year, and it could have made DC quick charging standard instead of making it a $750 add-on option. Frankly, that sucks, and any EV sold today should have DC quick charging as standards. But I'm also aware that these are niggles from someone who has a confirmation bias towards the Bolt, and because of that, I intimately know the car's weaknesses too. Which leaves us where? Should you buy a 2020 Bolt EV? If you're looking for a car and you're already leasing an earlier Bolt, I don't think you're going to get much from this refresh, and I personally don't think you should do anything with your existing car unless you need the extra range, but 21 miles is not a big reason to switch. Next year there's a bigger refresh on the way, plus a new car in the form of the Bolt EUV, so I would keep hold of your current Bolt if you have one, and if you're leasing one, well, consider extending that lease a year. Battery degradation is not a major issue at all, and frankly you could benefit from sitting tight for a while because it looks like the cars coming down the pipeline are going to be a lot better. But if you're not worried about the new Bolt, you're looking for this as your first electric car, or you're looking to save some money, I don't think I need to tell you that I'm a fan of the Bolt, and I think it's a great practical chuckable car. Frankly, I think it's the closest thing to an electric hot hatch this side of the Atlantic. And with GM dealers literally throwing thousands of dollars at buyers in cash on hood deals, there is no denying that you can get a great deal, especially if you're looking at the entry-level LT, which admittedly doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles of this car. Simply put, there are deals to be made right now if you're concerned about price, and if you are looking for a really affordable car. Remember, those first generation, first year Bolt EVs are now coming off lease, and they're probably going to have some truly amazing prices on the used car market, which could again get you into a longer distance EV for the first time on a serious budget. If I was looking for a new electric car today and I was interested in the Bolt, knowing a refresh was on the way, I wouldn't be buying right now. I'd be waiting. And the reason I decided to buy out my current lease was because I knew that the 20s didn't really offer me a whole lot more other than a little more range. But what really caused me to keep my 2017 Bolt, and I think what might make a good argument for you considering one of these new today, is the fact that the Bolt has proven itself as a long-legged and long-lived car. Battery degradation is almost unheard of. The cars are holding their value reasonably well, and maintenance costs are stupidly low. Sure, it doesn't have autonomous driving, and there isn't a fancy interior, and there isn't voice control. But for the most part, the Bolt EV is still a smart buy if you're looking to buy a car at long-term investment potential. TLDR, buy the new longer-legged Bolt if you know that you're not going to get envy next year when the mild refresh hits. And hold out if you think you're going to be greener than the Hulk watching Captain America get the girl. Thanks for watching this review. If you'd like to help us make more videos like this, please do like, comment and subscribe, and you can support us using the links below. Thanks to the folks scrolling by on my right. They are our charged up patrons. Thanks also go to Jeffrey Songster, John Lyons and Regine Fellows, our $50 a month self-driving patrons. And thanks to our $100 a month Starman patrons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback and Sean Udea. If you're looking for something else to watch on the channel, check this one out. Google thinks you're going to like it, but I'll be back soon with great content for you all to enjoy. So until then, stay safe, wash your hands and keep evolving.